I studied screenwriting in college, and there was a lot of focus on the 3-act structure, and really just that. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. But in the past couple of years, I've started to see a new story element discussed when it comes to outlining, and that is the midpoint. The best way I've heard it described is that the main character is going on a journey, and the midpoint is roughly when they flip and they've completed the major part of their character arc. Now that's surprising because we often hear character arc described as you kind of have your revelation in the final act. But the idea behind the midpoint is that your main character realizes at about the halfway mark that everything they've tried in the first half is not going to work. They can't be passive, they can't be reactive, they can't be a passenger in the story. Whatever they're going to do in the second half needs to be by their design. Because we don't want to follow a main character through the entire story who doesn't have an essential role in what's happening. The second half of Act 2 should be driven by the choices the main character makes more than the choices that are made against them. Now, certainly other characters will have agendas and they'll come into conflict, and all of that is still wonderful as far as storytelling goes. But the midpoint is where they basically complete a transition into the character they're going to need to be to finish the story. We've been talking about a few films. I keep bringing them up in these examples, and I'm going to use them again, and no one can stop me. This is my channel, and I'll do what I want. Haha, I'm out of power! In Jaws, Chief Brody has a realization halfway through that he cannot keep covering things up just because the mayor says so. In the first half of the film, he acquiesces a lot to the mayor. He reports a shark attack at the beginning, and then the mayor comes to him and says, no. Probably not a shark attack. Don't say shark attack, change your report. And he does it. Brody does it. He wants to close the beaches. The mayor says, no. We're not closing the beaches. So Brody doesn't close the beaches. At the midpoint, he realizes that is not going to fly anymore. It can't work that way. Brody realizes this method is doomed to failure, and he cannot keep doing it. Now, at that point, the mayor has realized his mistake, but it essentially doesn't matter. Brody has already realized his own error. He's spoken with the grieving mother, and he knows that what he did was wrong. So he takes initiative. He's going to be more proactive. He's going to go out and hunt down the shark. Because it's no longer enough to close the beaches. It's no longer enough to report the shark attack. It's no longer even enough to hire someone else to deal with it. He needs to be a part of it. He needs to atone. He needs to take penance for the death of this child. He needs to be involved. He needs to make sure that this person who says they're going to go hunt a shark actually does go and try and hunt a shark. So we now know what the end of that story is. Everything that happens in Act 2B and Act 3 happens because of the change in the character at the midpoint. Star Wars is another example. Star Wars, Luke Skywalker is very passive. He's very reactive. He goes along with whatever Obi-Wan says. Come with me to Mos Eisley. Come with me to Alderaan. Come with me onto the Death Star. They don't really have a choice on that one. They're abducted onto the Death Star. Stay here and let me handle what's going on. And then Obi-Wan leaves. And Luke is left to sit tight, just wait. But then, seconds later, Luke finds out that Leia is on the Death Star and scheduled to die. That's the midpoint. Because he realizes that Obi-Wan didn't know that. Obi-Wan can't help her. Obi-Wan isn't going to help her. We should save her. Because we're here and we should. And we should do it and we should save her. He rallies Han, he rallies Chewie, he gives C-3PO and R2-D2 directions on what to do. He is now the leader of this mission. Obi-Wan was the leader for the first half. Obi-Wan was entirely calling the shots, but that doesn't work anymore. Luke now needs to be proactive and take initiative. Now, this doesn't mean that his character arc is over. As we've talked about in a previous video, which you can watch up there, Luke Skywalker's final element of that arc is discovering his own faith. That's what the end of that film is. So your main character isn't necessarily done learning things just because we're at the midpoint. That's not what I mean when I say that this is the culmination of a character arc. What I mean is that this is basically a radicalization of the character. Whatever ideals they may have had in the first half were lies. They were telling themselves. The lie the main character believed has to fall apart by the midpoint. Die Hard's midpoint is about him realizing that the cops cannot handle what's going on without his help. In fact, the cops can't handle it at all. He has to be the person in command inside the building. He has the most information. He's posed in a way that the terrorists can't thwart him because he's inside the building. It's down to him. The midpoint needs to take a character who believes in the first half that other people are going to help or that there are other opportunities, and by the midpoint, they have to realize the full trajectory, the full arc of where the story is going and what their role in it is. there should be no more ambiguity by the halfway point in the movie. We need to know who our main character is and what they want. I think the M. Night Shyamalan film The Village, if memory serves, I haven't watched that movie in quite some time, but if I remember, it did this exceptionally well. We spend most of the movie following Joaquin Phoenix and Bryce Dallas Howard, and I remember as a young man thinking that Joaquin Phoenix was the main character, but that's not the case. He gets stabbed by Adrian Brody, and then we realize the entire time the main character has been Bryce Dallas Howard. We now know at the midpoint that Bryce Dallas Howard has to do whatever it takes to save Joaquin Phoenix, and that includes leaving the village. You spend the first hour of that film essentially building up the threat. You do not leave the village. There are monsters out there. It's not safe. And then that midpoint says, okay, all of that is true. I mean, spoilers for the village, it's not true, but this only works if we assume it is. And then the midpoint says, all of that is true, but there's something else that needs to be done. And that, I think, is a pivotal thing that a midpoint does. It basically says, yes, everything that's happened so far is true, the dangers are real, the threats are all there, but you need to do something else. It's going to fly in the face of everything that's happened so far, everything that you've said you've wanted, everything that you've said you've needed. It's all going to be tested. Iron Man, I talked about this last week. The midpoint is him realizing that he needs to go out and be a hero. And superhero movies have generally pretty good midpoints. By the midpoint, they are usually in their superhero identity. You're literally halfway through Batman Begins, he says, I'm Batman. That kind of thing happens a lot with superhero movies. And then the second half is all about them being the superhero. The first half is about them getting to that point, self-actualizing, radicalizing to the point where once the midpoint arrives, they are now the hero that we're going to see for the rest of that story. That works really well with superheroes because superheroes are generally reactive, but you also have them leaping into danger as a superhero because they are putting on a mask and going out and fighting crime or saving people from burning buildings. So even though they're still reactive in the second half, they are in this new identity. If you're not dealing with an origin story, then maybe the reveal isn't halfway through. But by the midpoint, the main character does need to know the stakes as they're going against the villain. They need to have interacted with the villain, definitely at least once, and know roughly what they're going to do for the rest of the film. Again, I'm using film because it's very, very easy, and I just watch a lot of movies. If you want to know more about this concept, I definitely recommend you check out a video from Lessons from the Screenplay. It does an exceptional job breaking this down when talking about the film Collateral, which I think is a wonderful film. And I also encourage you to think about this when you are reading or watching whatever it is that you absorb, whatever fiction you read and watch. Look for a moment halfway through when they are kind of in a no turning back moment, when they realize what is ahead of them. I mentioned this last week, but the midpoint is basically when you stop doing all the fun and games of Act 2 and start moving towards a goal, which is the third act. Now, here's my problem with midpoints. I wasn't taught about them. I struggle with midpoints because it was not part of my education about fiction and story structure. So I have to work extra hard on my midpoints because when I'm telling a story naturally, that's not part of what I'm used to. I've only learned about them in the last couple of years. That was well after I had been working on my novel. So as I was doing my major rewrite, which happened for a lot of reasons, I could go in and I could actually add in a midpoint that galvanized the main character into an objective for the second half of the book. Fortunately, now I can actually use midpoints in my writing now that I've learned about them, but it's still tricky for me to remember. And I think that's why I separate Act 2 into two parts, because that helps me remember that there should be some sort of distinction. Something should happen at the midpoint to separate Act 2A and Act 2B. That's what reminds me when I'm outlining that there should be a midpoint, something to change the character in some fundamental way. The story circle theory by Dan Harmon is also a terrific way to look at this because the story circle talks about all the ways that your main character is reactive to everything that's going on, and then about halfway through, they theoretically find what they were looking for, and then they are proactive in the things that happen going forward. Look up some more info on the story circle. I think there's some terrific videos and articles out there talking about it, and I use each beat of the story circle in my outlining process. Your main character needs to change in every scene and in every interaction, otherwise whatever's happening doesn't belong in your story. But the midpoint should be a moment that we see the change, that we witness something major. And again, there will still be changes as the story goes on. They need to have some sort of major catharsis by the time we reach the ending. And even if the revelation they have at the midpoint is flawed or misled or wrong, it still gives them something to do that changes their perspective. They need to change their perspective halfway through. That's the simplest way to say it. Toy Story has a terrific midpoint that separates your story because you've got The beginning, setting up Woody and his life and the introduction of Buzz. The fun and games, which is Buzz and Woody's interaction and their battle for dominance over Andy's room. And then at the midpoint, Woody and Buzz get lost. And now they are lost toys. And everything that Woody had, everything that was cherished and valued, is upended. He loses everything. Now he has to find out if he's really the kind of person he thought he was, or the kind of toy he thought he was. Because everything in the beginning of that story sets up that you do not want to be out and about. You do not want to be a lost toy. You do not want to be in the hands of Sid. Which, by the way, Act 2B, they get in the hands of Sid. And then we know the ending of Toy Story. The Act 3 is dealing with Buzz getting a rocket strapped to his back and all of that. The midpoint challenges Woody. It doesn't necessarily make him have a revelation, but it absolutely works to do the other thing that a midpoint needs to do, which is change the direction of your story. Because going into Act 2B, it should not look the same as Act 2A. Something needs to have happened. Something needs to change the dynamic. And getting lost and separated from Andy and getting a new objective, that's a great way to do it. Woody is reactive throughout the first half. He's reactive to the birthday party getting pushed forward, to the arrival of Buzz, to the challenge of his dominance as the main toy. Then he gets lost. And yes, he's still reacting to things that are going on, but now he has an objective. In the first half, it's fuzzy. Maintain his relationship with Andy, deal with Buzz, question mark, question mark, question mark. Not anymore. Get home to Andy. That's the objective for the second half. Get home to Andy. Get Buzz home to Andy happens as well as the story goes on. That's what happens in the end of Act 2 is he realizes, Woody is not the only toy. He doesn't belong exclusively with Andy. Buzz should come home too. He learns that respect for Buzz. He's not done learning by the midpoint, but the midpoint makes him realize everything he had was very, very fragile. And it gives him something to do for the rest of the story. The midpoint makes your characters proactive, which is very, very valuable because reactive characters are not that much fun for an audience, and it gives your character something to do. It makes sure that everything that happens in the second half has a very clear goal. That's it, that's the video. Next week we're going to talk about Act 3, and then we're going to talk about endings the week after that. If you like the video, hit the like button. If you want to see more videos, hit the subscribe button. If I get to 100 subscribers by the end of the year, then at the beginning of 2021, I'm going to give away an Audible book to one of my subscribers. The only way to be a participant is to subscribe. If you think other people might enjoy this, please share it with them. And if you disagree with me entirely, hit me up in the comments and let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I love you, Victoria.